Welcome back, folks, to Boss Economics World, where we slice through the economic nonsense, call out the government's boneheaded blunders, and expose the ticking time bombs they've buried in your wallets. I'm your host, the guy who's been screaming into the void about reckless policy since before it was cool, and today, oh boy, do we have a doozy. Strap in, because we're diving headfirst into Trump's latest tariff tantrum, a masterclass in economic self-sabotage that's got Wall Street sweating, Main Street panicking, and the Fed clutching its pearls like a Victorian damsel. Let's break this down, point by point, surface to core, and show you how this administration is driving the U.S. economy straight into a recession-shaped ditch, all while waving the flag of simplicity. Spoiler alert, the only thing simple here is the thinking. Let's start with the headlines, shall we? On July 4, 2025, while the rest of America was barbecuing hot dogs and waving sparklers, President Trump decided to celebrate Independence Day by dropping a trade war bomb. He announced that starting August 1, 2025, new tariffs will hit U.S. trading partners, with letters of doom going out to 10 or 12 countries as early as July 4, and more to follow. By July 9, he promises, every country on his naughty list will be fully covered. And what's in these tariffs? Oh, just a casual range of 10% to a whopping 70%, depending on how much Trump likes your flag, apparently. This is a step up from his April 2025 Liberation Day threats, where he floated a 10% baseline tariff and a max of 50%. Now, it seems, he's decided to crank the dial to 11, because why not? The fallout? Predictable pandemonium. Stocks in Asia and Europe tanked faster than a crypto scam, the dollar took a nosedive, and U.S. markets, conveniently closed for the holiday, are bracing for a Monday bloodbath. Meanwhile, trading partners from South Korea to the EU are scrambling like contestants on a reality show, trying to hammer out last-minute deals before Trump's July 9 deadline. Some, like Vietnam and the UK, have already caved, while others, like Japan, are getting the full Trumpian temper tantrum treatment, with threats of 30% or 35% tariffs or whatever number we determine. Ah, the sweet smell of economic diplomacy. But here's the kicker, folks, Trump's justification for all this chaos is, wait for it, simplicity. Yes, the man who's turned international trade into a geopolitical soap opera claims he just wants to send a letter out and say what tariffs they are going to be paying, because it's much easier. Easier for whom, Mr. President? Certainly not for American businesses, consumers, or the global economy, all of which are now hostages to your tariff roulette. This is not simplicity, this is economic vandalism dressed up as leadership. Now, let's dig a little deeper, shall we? At the surface, tariffs sound like a tough guy way to bring money into the United States, as Trump claims. But here's the dirty little secret they don't tell you at the Mar-a-Lago buffet, tariffs are a tax, and guess who pays it? Not China, not Vietnam, not the EU, it's you, the American consumer, and American businesses. According to a 2024 study by the National Bureau of Economic Research, the Trump administration's 2018-2019 tariffs cost U.S. consumers and businesses $40 billion annually in higher prices. And that was with tariffs averaging just 12%. Now, with Trump threatening up to 70% on some countries, Bloomberg Economics estimates that average U.S. import duties could skyrocket to 20%, a sevenfold increase from pre-Trump levels of 3%. What does this mean in real life? Higher prices on everything from your morning coffee to your kids' school supplies. Take Indonesia, for example, a major exporter of critical minerals like nickel, used in everything from EV batteries to stainless steel. Trump's tariff threats are pushing Indonesia to rush a deal, but if talks fail, those costs will ripple through U.S. supply chains, jacking up prices for cars, appliances, and more. And don't forget Vietnam, a key player in electronics and apparel, a 20% tariff on their exports, plus a 40% penalty on transshipped goods, means your next iPhone or pair of Nikes could cost you 20% more. But wait, there's more. These tariffs don't just hit your wallet, they light a match under inflation, which is already a beast the Federal Reserve is struggling to tame. As of June 2025, U.S. inflation was hovering at 4.1%, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, well above the Fed's 2% target. The Fed, under intense pressure from Trump to cut rates, is now in a bind. Why? Because tariff-driven price hikes could spiral into what Fed officials call persistent cost of living pressures. Translation, stagflation, the toxic combo of stagnant growth and runaway inflation. The last time we saw this was in the 1970s, and trust me, folks, it wasn't a disco party. If the Fed caves to Trump and cuts rates, inflation could spiral out of control. If it holds firm, borrowing costs stay high, choking businesses and homeowners. Damned if you do, damned if you don't, thanks, Mr. President. Let's zoom out further, because this isn't just about higher prices, it's about the very engine of the U.S. economy. Tariffs, by design, disrupt trade, and trade is the lifeblood of global growth. The U.S. imported $3.2 trillion in goods in 2024, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, supporting millions of jobs in retail, manufacturing, and logistics. Now, Trump's tariff threats are putting that at risk. Bloomberg Economics warns that if these tariffs are fully implemented, they could shave 1.5% off U.S. GDP growth in 2026. That might not sound like much, but with GDP growth already slowing to 1.8% in Q2 2025, per the Bureau of Economic Analysis, that's enough to tip us into a recession. And who gets hurt the most? Not the Wall Street fat cats, who can hedge their bets, but Main Street, small businesses, farmers, and workers. Take the soybean farmers in Iowa, who were decimated by Trump's first trade war with China in 2018. Exports to China dropped by 50%, and despite billions in bailouts, many never recovered. Now, with new tariffs looming, farmers are bracing for round two. Or look at small manufacturers in Ohio, who rely on imported steel and aluminum. The American Iron and Steel Institute reported in 2024 that Trump's earlier tariffs raised domestic steel prices by 25%, forcing manufacturers to cut jobs or pass costs to consumers. With tariffs now set to hit a broader range of goods, the pain will be even worse. But hey, at least Trump can claim he brought money into the United States, right? Wrong. The U.S. Treasury collected $71 billion in tariff revenue in 2024, a drop in the bucket compared to the $6.7 trillion federal budget. Meanwhile, the economic damage, lost jobs, higher prices, slower growth, far outweighs the gains. This isn't winning, it's economic self-harm in the name of political theater. Now, let's broaden the lens to the global stage, because Trump's tariff tantrum isn't just a U.S. problem, it's a global economic dumpster fire. By threatening allies like the EU, Japan, and South Korea with punitive tariffs, Trump is shredding decades of trade relationships built on trust and mutual benefit. The EU, which exported $576 billion in goods to the U.S. in 2024, is now racing to secure a deal, with carmakers like Volkswagen and BMW pushing for tariff relief in exchange for U.S. investments. But Trump's simplicity approach, dictating terms via ultimatum, is poisoning the well. If talks fail, the EU has already signaled it will retaliate, potentially targeting U.S. exports like bourbon, Harley-Davidsons, and tech goods, as it did in 2018. Meanwhile, countries like China are watching from the sidelines, gleefully rubbing their hands. Remember, Trump's first trade war pushed China to diversify its supply chains, reducing reliance on U.S. imports and strengthening ties with Asia, Africa, and Europe. According to the World Bank, China's share of global exports rose from 12.8% in 2017 to 14.7% in 2024, while the U.S. share stagnated at 8.1%. Now, with Trump alienating allies, China has a golden opportunity to position itself as the reliable trade partner, especially in critical sectors like semiconductors and green tech. Just look at Vietnam, which Trump is punishing for transshipping. Much of that trade is driven by Chinese firms rerouting goods to avoid U.S. tariffs. By targeting Vietnam, Trump is inadvertently strengthening China's regional dominance. Brilliant strategy, sir. So, what's the root of this mess? It's not just tariffs, it's the government's broader failure to manage the economy with foresight, coherence, or competence. Trump's tariff policy is a microcosm of this administration's approach, all bluster, no strategy. Instead of investing in innovation, infrastructure, or workforce training to boost U.S. competitiveness, Trump is leaning on protectionism,